This podcast is not intended to provide any investment advice. The opinions expressed here by either the hosts or guests do not necessarily reflect the views of PSA, Collectors Holdings, or any of their affiliates. Any discussion of collectible values in the past or present is not a guarantee of future performance.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to 2024's first installment of the Index here on the PSA Pod. I'm Ryan Greene, and joining me today for this episode is Card Ladder's Chris McGill. This year, the Index will continue to discuss the hobby from the vantage point of price data, market trends, etc., provided by Card Ladder, but with a twist. Instead of looking at the hobby as a whole from the last month, we're going to zero in on a trending athlete, trending card, whose data supports an interesting story that is relevant to you, the collector. Today, we're going to kick off this new format of the Index by focusing on Brock Purdy, second-year quarterback who has gone from Mr. Irrelevant in the 2022 NFL Draft to now being the third youngest starting quarterback in Super Bowl history this Sunday, all in a span of 22 months, which is pretty crazy. Opinions on Purdy are all over the place, depending on where you consume them, both on the field, in the hobby. Numbers don't lie. That much we know. So, Chris, thanks for joining today. And this is going to be a good one to kick this new era of the Index off with, because we're talking about a guy who is hot, trending, but man, there's like a really key piece of the picture that's missing, and we won't know whether it's there or not until this Sunday.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun discussion. This is going to produce some takes that are going to either age well or not well at all.
We can revisit them in the coming weeks. I'm sure Drew, our producer, is not going to be shy about throwing those back in our face. So, and before next football season. So, Chris, before we get into talking about the cards, let's talk about the player and the performance. Anyone who follows you, especially on Instagram handle in the bio, if you're not following, in the bio and description. Anybody who follows you knows you're big on QBR as one of the truest indicators of a quarterback's performance in your assessments. So let's start there. For those unfamiliar, what is QBR? Because we hear a lot of different advanced stats with a lot of different acronyms. What is QBR? And what stands out about Purdy's 2023 season when you take a closer look at it using this metric?
Well, I love this topic, and in the interest of brevity, I won't get too long-winded about it, but we could do hours on this if we wanted to. I think you summed it up really nicely. I really like QBR as a metric of quarterback performance, and it's certainly not the only one, and that's where I would start, is to say some of the popular metrics that we look at for quarterbacks include QBR, not to be confused with passer rating, which is the one that we honestly see a lot more on TV, is passer rating. QBR is proprietary. It's ESPN's algorithm. And I think that kind of keeps it out of some of the broadcasts on other networks and stuff. But QBR is very different from passer rating. QBR is based on total EPA, and more specifically, it's based on EPA per play. EPA, in my opinion, is probably the greatest unit of metric or unit of measure in any of the sports that I follow, which are primarily basketball and football. EPA is expected points added. And we won't go into a big diatribe about it here. If you're interested more, look it up. Look up the formula for total QBR, which is not published, but pieces of it are given. And it is disclosed that it's based largely on EPA per play, expected points added per play, which is a really great, fun, neutral way to measure a quarterback's performance against a historical average. And that makes it a pretty good apples-to-apples comparison across QBs. It takes into consideration rushing, passing, penalties drawn. If the quarterback has an action play, it's factored in. And that's what makes it different from passer rating. That's what makes it different than something like adjusted net yards per attempt, which is another popular one. Completion percentage over expected, which again is just focused only on passing. To me, the ones that are great to look at are the EPA-based metrics like QBR, or if you're an eye test guy, which I think everybody is to some degree. There's also PFF, which gives grades for each quarterback. So that with PFF, they have somebody sitting there watching every snap a quarterback takes, and they grade every QB action play. So if you're more of an eye test guy, you got PFF. If you're more of a metrics, measurables guy like I am, you got QBR and EPA per play stuff.
You could get lost all day in advanced metrics.
Yes.
And I love them, but I don't like to use them for the whole picture. EPA, I think you're spot on. It kind of reminds me of WAR in baseball, right? And it just shows true impact on the game and the outcome of the game, kind of by bundling up a lot of different things. But I'm a huge football fan. I know you're a huge football fan, and you mentioned the eye test. I love the eye test. I think it has its place in an assessment. So do you consider yourself a Purdy guy, quote unquote? Are you a believer in Purdy when we just look at the eye test and you take, I guess, advanced stats out of it for a moment and just watch him play? Like, do you watch him and say, yeah, that's a dude?
Eye test, I'm lower on Purdy. Metrics, I'm super high on Purdy. So the numbers are painting a picture of this guy from the moment he started last season. He didn't have enough action plays to qualify for the final list, but if he did, he would have been 5th in QBR last year, and then this year he was 1st. So the numbers in terms of QBR and EPA stuff, they absolutely love the impact that Purdy brings to the table. PFF, he was graded top 5, and interestingly enough, he was the highest graded rushing quarterback this year in PFF's system. So eye test people are pretty high on him too. I can't shake the feeling that when I watch Purdy play, Ryan, there's a Brett Favre in him. There is a gunslinger in him that throws passes across his body to the other side of the field. There's an interception. Hold my breath when I watch him play. The eye test to me says he makes some remarkable plays. He throws some dangerous passes. He will sit in the pocket and get absolutely crushed and still rip a throw. So like the eye test makes me more nervous about him. He's reckless when I watch him play to a certain extent, but the numbers say that whatever this guy's doing, the level of risk taking that he's comfortable with, it produces elite results.
I love the Favre vibes comp. I'm not going to say it's a full comp. It's like a Favre vibes comp. And I know on the eye test for me, I watch a decent amount of the Niners. I think he's a pretty good NFL quarterback. Nothing's really blown me away. I think he really showed me a lot in the moment of the NFC title game coming back in the second half. Like a couple of those plays he made with his feet, I felt like we hadn't seen a ton of that yet. And I mean, you saw the competitor in him really kind of level up. I hate this comp. It's not a full comp. But when I look at the Niners and kind of how he fits into the picture of what the Niners are right now, I kind of get those like 2001 to 2003 Brady vibes. And this is not me calling Brock Purdy the next Tom Brady. I am absolutely not. But if you remember, like Brady didn't become this elite big numbers monster until really like 5-6 years into his career. In those first few years of his career, they had an elite defense in New England, and he just needed to not screw up pretty much. And I hate the term, but I mean, there's like a lot of game manager vibes there, right? But I think what we saw in the NFC title game was him really step up to the moment and show that he's more than that. So I think the trajectory's there. Again, circling it back, I think we're going to get the full picture a lot more clearer after Sunday when, the Niners and the Chiefs square off in the Super Bowl and he's going up against the best living quarterback in all of football. But again, this is the index and we talk about numbers, data as it pertains to the hobby. So let's get into a little bit of that. We know the lineage of San Francisco 49ers quarterbacks, and everything in the hobby right now is showing that people really want this guy to be the next great San Francisco 49ers quarterback. So starting with your player index over at Card Ladder, He's up 66%. This is 100 plus cards tracked since what we're calling the start of the season, the start of training camp, August 1, 2023. Saw a peak spike in mid-October when the Niners were really, really hot and looked just unbeatable. His values have grown across the board, and the numbers show at PSA too. He's the number one most submitted football athlete for grading since January 1 of this year, 2024. He's number two, just barely behind Trevor Lawrence in terms of most submitted football athletes since August 1, 2023, the start of training camp. So any of that surprise you? Did you think maybe it would be specifically on the card ladder side? Did you think his growth would maybe be more or less given what we know from the last several months? How does that kind of digest with you?
Yeah, well, I I love the PSA grading data there that you just provided, because I don't think there's a world in sports fandom that has Purdy as, on the same tier as guys like Trevor Lawrence. Even given the success and the track record and the numbers, I think most talent evaluators, like, for example, a list like the Ringer's quarterback ranking list, they still have Purdy as a below average to average quarterback. I think the Ringer has Purdy as the 18th best quarterback. So for the hobby to have him higher is cool. It's fun. And I don't think that's strictly a reflection of his ability. I think it's also a reflection of him having this moment that, where when a guy goes from obscurity to prominence quickly, all of a sudden all those cards are getting thrown into packages and sent to PSA, whereas for other players it was more consistent, more steady, right? But I think that's a really cool stat, and it in my opinion, it reflects well on the taste of the hobby in terms of which quarterbacks they're interested in getting cards graded of. Yeah.
Because if you think about it, he had that elbow injury in last year's NFC title game, but a lot of his key product cards didn't really hit the market until either then or shortly thereafter. So it's almost like what some of that data shows me is that a lot of collectors, and on the card ladder side too, really went into wait and see mode with him. Like, nobody was making really any rash decisions around Brock Purdy really until early into this season.
That's a good point. And the elbow injury is so interesting too, the torn UCL, because there were questions this summer about who would be QB1 coming out of training camp for the 49ers. It was not at all considered a fact that Purdy would be the starting quarterback in week one, partially because of the injury and partially just because people maybe thought last year was a bit of a fluke. So considering that, I think his index being up 66% over the last 6 months, which would take us back to August, I think that's a modest number. That's pretty modest, and it tells me one of two things. It's either that his prices were already pretty high in August, or people are still not so sure about him, and they still have reservations about him. Or maybe it's a mix of both. It is funny to look at his index, Ryan, and see that it hit its max on October 15th, and then it like pulls back about 25% and just kind of levels off more or less. And what's interesting about that is that's when he had a 3-game losing streak with the Vikings and the Bengals and the Browns. And he was concussed for 1.5 of those games, I guess. He got concussed and then he passed the protocol, but he didn't look good in the following game. But that's what the hobby needed to pump its brakes, was like, okay, little 3-game losing streak here. Maybe this guy, is fallible, or maybe in any event, the hobby really pumped his brakes there after that little losing streak.
Yeah. And it's natural, right? But man, we're going to talk about high end and at some of the base levels, starting on the base end, you look at the values of where he's at right now going into the Super Bowl. The key base rookie card for any ultra modern football athlete is the Prism rookie card. His 2022 Prism base in a PSA 10, which the pop is just over 2,800. Since August 1, it's up 106.6%, currently selling around $175. And it, I think you're right. It's a little bit of both, because if you look at, by comparison, Joe Burrow, who in the ultra modern era is really the guy at quarterback after Mahomes, hit the scene. His 2020 base Prism rookie in the PSA 10, and the pop is, almost 3x, less than 3x, but just under 7,000. Currently valued at $135, so $40 less than Purdy's. So Purdy's the hotter player. Burrow obviously has a much higher supply now in a PSA 10 grade, but when I say PSA 10 Brock Purdy base Prism 175, I feel like right now seems about right.
Yeah, I love that comparison that you make, because I think about it from the perspective of, if I'm walking the floor at a card show like the National or the Long Beach Expo or the Dallas Card Show or something like that, and I come across a display case from a dealer, and in it I see a Joe Burrow Prism rookie base PSA 10, and there's a $135 sticker on it, and then next to it I see a Brock Purdy base Prism PSA 10, and there's a $175 sticker on it. I don't have the population information right in front of me, but the common sense aspect of that is, I think Joe Burrow is the far more collected player than Brock Purdy right now. So you do have to factor in the population when you get to analyzing it. But in terms of that showcase common sense test, I'd reach for the Burrow before I reach for the Purdy, probably.
Yeah, I'm still there. I'm definitely still there. And, again, we'll see if any of that changes based on what happens this weekend, because Burrow has been on that stage and didn't quite reach the top before. We'll see if Purdy can. But of course, like the ones that make waves, we talk about these transactions that are happening every weekend at card shows and card shops around the country. There's also the big spotlight sales, and Purdy's had some really big ones just in the last couple months. Which one or a couple have really stood out to you, Chris?
The one that is mind-boggling is his highest sale ever, which is the NT Stars and Stripes Shield PSA 10, which he has another shield. He has the Platinum 1/1 shield that's the parallel to his NT RPA, and then he has this one, the Stars and Stripes variant of his NT RPA, which has its own shield. So it speaks to the PSA 10 premium. I think above all, that this card, the Stars and Stripes variant shield, sold for $186,000, and you compare that to the true Platinum 1/1, which was not a PSA 10, which went for around 125 or 130, somewhere in that range. So that's the most mind-boggling sale to me, Ryan, is that this isn't even his most desired NT card, at least not in my opinion, and still in the PSA 10 holder, it brought that price. Kind of crazy.
On the high end, there are definitely some believers. What's widely looked at as arguably one of the best cards of any ultra modern athlete is the Prism Black Finite 1/1 rookie, which recently saw a top bid about 2.5 weeks ago at $125,000, $125,723 to be exact. But he's been having healthy 5-figure sales of key cards for a little bit now. The Prism Gold auto out of 10 that recent in a PSA 10, which recently sold for $18K. And there was a National Treasures, the true RPA out of 99 PSA 10 sold for $13K in late January. So he's really seeing healthy sales right now, and I think it always says a lot when these high end cards are really commanding that premium. I think it shows I think I'm not saying it shows overwhelming belief that this is a guy going forward, but I think it shows that there's some very legitimate belief in him.
Yeah, I agree. In terms of the hobby, he's carved out a spot for himself among the most highly prospected quarterbacks. When you have NT RPAs out of 99, as you point out, selling in the low five figures, that's up there. I mean, that's Josh Allen territory. That's Jalen Hurts territory. That's Tua territory. So he's in that group. He's definitely got a space carved out there.
So back in the day on the PSA Pod, we used to do a little something called the core score, and we're not going to get into that whole formula right now, but I kind of want to put you on the spot here on like a scale of 1 to 10 when we talk about how collectible Purdy is right now. And there's a lot of things you factor in, like position premium, right? Quarterback is the position in football. The market they play in, the franchise and the team situation, which looks really good. Top of your head on a scale of 1 to 10, like where do you kind of pin Purdy's collectability right now for someone who might be looking at a new player to collect and he's really appealing to them?
Yeah, I think it's lower than his prices suggest. I think there's a lot of expectations baked into his prices, as there are for lots of players, not just him. But I think the general collectability of a player is downstream from mainstream media discussion. And just like to kind of paint the picture of what I mean by that, I'll walk into a card shop, and if that card shop has TVs, usually like ESPN or NFL Network or something like that is on the TV, or Fox Sports 1. And what are those people saying, and what's filling the air in the card shop as people are there collecting and buying stuff and just talking and feeding off of the narratives that are being pushed on a mainstream level. And the stuff that's being said about Purdy is rarely glowing praise. It's usually, it's people responding to Cam Newton saying that he's a game manager, or, it's usually pretty darn critical. And like there, another take that Newton recently floated was that he's like the 10th best player on the 49ers. And there's a lot of that type of sentiment. Like Bill Barnwell had a nice article on ESPN Plus where he gave his MVP ballot, his hypothetical MVP ballot, and he had Purdy at second for MVP, which I think much higher than most people do. But he included a quote in that said, if anybody else put up the metrics in a single season that Purdy did, they would have won MVP. And historically they have. So like for Purdy, it's like the guy's doing what you would want to see your guy do, but he's not. And for reasons that stem from just kind of watching the style of play and looking at all the weapons and looking at the incredible coach that they have and how they had success prior. And Jimmy Garoppolo also went to a Super Bowl with this team, albeit his numbers weren't as good. So what I'm saying is his collectability to me is like a 6.5, something like that. There's room for a lot of growth there, because the narrative just of loving this guy is just not there right now. He's seen as lower than a lot of the other QBs.
The praise you do see for him always seems to be more team praise.
For sure.
And that I think that brings up something interesting. And tell me if you agree with this. It's almost as if, do you think he gets dinged, I guess, for being a 7th round pick QB? Because they drafted him in the 7th round with the last pick in the draft in 2022. And it's funny because his success has made a lot of people forget the fact that a year earlier, they traded 3 first-round picks to move up 9 spots to draft a quarterback who is now a 3rd-string quarterback in Dallas, right? And one, it's amazing that it's made people forget about that. But you mentioned if you saw another quarterback putting up these metrics and having the success, let's say it was Trey Lance at quarterback right now for the Niners, the number 3 overall pick in the 2021 draft by the Niners, who was having this success and leading them to the Super Bowl. You have to agree his collectability is probably looked at way higher than a 6.5. strictly because of having that first round pedigree.
Totally. I totally agree with that. Yeah, he would be up there like the 9. He'd be up there with Burrow, right? I mean, it'd be a similar Burrow thing.
I think about the hobby hype we had around Burrow before that Super Bowl at the end of the 2021 season. And I think that's what Trey Lance would be right now if he was in those shoes.
Yep.
Like, it'd be crazy. So he is collectible. He's still got room to grow on your scale. But so let's talk about it now. People are, Purdy's front and center with a lot of fans and collectors right now. Give me a low end, a mid level, and a high end card that really stand out to you right now for collectors who may be saying, I want to go get in on a Purdy card or two in the next week or so. Where are you looking?
Well, I don't know if I'd want to get into the Purdy market quite yet. but if we were, Ryan, if we were, I love this question. Made me have to dig into some checklists and survey the available Purdy cards. And I noticed, Ryan, that a lot of his rookie cards and rookie year cards show him in practice clothes. He has shorts on and stuff, which, so does Brady. A lot of his rookies have that too. But I'm not a big fan of that, so I ruled those out. And then I noticed that almost all of his autographs, and there are some exceptions, NT, Flawless, a few other products, but a lot of his autographs are sticker autographs, which is fine. Those are still very collectible cards too, and his hand still signed that sticker that got placed on that card. It's still a significant collectible item, but I would steer clear of those two just as a preference. I'm not a huge fan of the sticker. Not against anybody who is, though. I understand the collectability of those, and we have huge prices on those. Like you talked about the Prism Gold autograph, which is a sticker autograph selling for 5 figures. So those cards clearly are still important. But here's my list with those caveats in place. For low end, I went with the 2022 Select Club Level Silver PSA 10. And that's a weird choice. I know that's a weird choice. People go, club level. I didn't even know that was a level in Select because it's a new level. It's like a year or two old. But I went with that in part because it's pretty low pop. It's 88, pop 88. And Purdy only has 2 base cards in Select. He's in club level and he is in field level. And the club level appears prior in the checklist. The club level is card number 213 in the checklist. And I like the first appearance. So the fact that the club level is the first appearance, the fact that it's only pop 88 as a silver and a PSA 10, and it only sold for $185. Last sale was February 4th. That made it my low-end selection. What do you think about that?
Some people have preferences on this. It's a vertical card, whereas his field level,
Indeed.
the field level is usually considered like the premium tier for Select products. It's a horizontal card. Some people love it. Some people don't. Kind of goes back and forth, but yeah, that's a good choice.
Great point. That's such a good point, too. Yeah, it looks nicer as the vertical, in my opinion. All right, for the mid-level, I went with the low-hanging fruits. I went with his first Kaboom, which is not a rookie year card. It's from 2023 rather than his rookie season, which is 2022. But I still went with it. It is still a first. It's still his first Kaboom. Kaboom just is everywhere, man. It's the Kaboom prices on players like CJ Stroud are now the subject of memes that they're so expensive, and it's the card that's got a lot of gravity and a lot of excitement surrounding it. So I went with that. There are no graded sales that I was able to find yet, but the last time a raw copy sold, it went for $2,600 on January 31st. Are you a fan of the Kaboom choice or no?
I love the choice. Me personally, as a collector, I'm not a huge Kaboom guy, but I do understand the significance and the appeal of them. And I do think of all these, the quote unquote case hit inserts that have become big in the last few years, like Color Blast, Downtown. I think Kaboom is going to end up having, I guess, the most prestige down the line for a variety of reasons. And I also am really big on firsts. Not a rookie card, but first Kaboom. I think it's significant and bridges that gap. So that's a good pick.
Yeah, it's a good word, significance. Yeah, it is. It's I think you're right. It's going to end up being a significant card. All right, and then for the high end, this probably is an obvious choice, but I went with the Prism Gold from 2022. His rookie Prism Gold, any grade. To me, it's on a card like that. Hey, it's great if you can afford the PSA 10, but there's only 10 of them. Great card. The last sale for that one was back on November 14th. A PSA 9 sold for a little over $10,000. What's interesting about that sale is the last Mahomes Prism Gold PSA 9 went for about $120,000 back in April of 2023. So you've kind of got this rough multiplier where Mahomes is 10 to 11x Purdy, or to put it differently, Purdy's about 10% of Mahomes. And I was thinking, is that right? Is Purdy 10% of Mahomes? Does that ratio make sense? And I kind of think it does. Do you think it's proper? Is it?
I think that's pretty fair right now. No, I absolutely do. I think, again, it's such a unique situation that I think we could be looking at that totally different 1 week from today. Seriously, if he goes out and has a 5 touchdown game in the Super Bowl and they slay the dragon, I mean, how does that not add but this sale that you're mentioning, I mean, that was also November 14th, which if I'm getting the dates right, that was at the tail end of that skid. So, I'd be really interested what that sale would look like if that same card was available this week. I think I have to assume it would probably be a little higher.
Yeah, probably. What's so funny, Ryan, is that what we're probably going to get out of the Super Bowl is the same thing Purdy gives us every week, which is an ambiguous, a performance that lends itself to all types of interpretation. If you want, he'll probably have a few turnover-worthy throws, but he'll probably also have some masterful plays too, and just, it's just like, unless this guy goes out there and throws 25 for 25 and every pass is down the field and he's evading the pocket, and unless he plays the perfect game, I don't think any agendas are changing, even if they win.
It's crazy. He's going to have to prove it for, very similar to, again, to bring that name up, how Brady had to do it for several years as a 6th round pick before people really bought in. It's been so long that I think people forget that. He's probably he doesn't have the benefit of that 1st round pedigree, and he's going to have to show it over time. But a gold prism, great pick. Obviously, a gold prism for any player is great. A gold prism when it's the team color match, I mean, come on. That's as cool as it gets. So I want to end it on this. After Sunday, we have no football at the NFL level for 6+ months. The National 2024 rolls around. All right. So picture yourself in Cleveland in July. Quarterbacks are always hot. Training camps have just opened up. The hype for football all across the show floor is high. Where do you see Purdy, regardless of the outcome this Sunday? Where do you see Purdy among the ranks of the quote unquote trending quarterbacks that we're going to see transacting quite a bit on the show floor? Like, you have your staples, like Mahomes is hot every year at the National. Josh Allen's hot every year at the National. Brady's hot every year at the National. And then, Burrow, Herbert, all those guys kind of come in. You'll have rookies this year. You'll have the rookies from last year, like Stroud. Where does Purdy, in your opinion, kind of fit in that group?
I think he's at the lower end of that group. I think there will be interest. I think his cards will be pretty liquid. I think there will be people speculating on him going into next season. But I think he'll be a step beneath C.J. Stroud. I think he'll be, multiple steps behind Mahomes. It'll be interesting to see where Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, Tua, not that those guys are all in the same category as players, but just at some point, room has to be made for the Caleb Williams, Drake May, upcoming draft class, which is loaded with QBs. And, at some point, you can't prospect on everybody. You're going to have to move on. And I think Purdy will always be one of the first ones on the chopping block. And, ironically, I think if they win the Super Bowl, I almost think that puts him in a worse position.
Is that because you're thinking that's the ceiling?
Exactly. Because you're like, what? And you're like, what else? What can I prospect on here? What can I hope can happen that can energize his market further in the short term? But to someone like me, like I want to wait a few more years before I take a look at a Purdy card or something like that. Like I'd like to take a look at Purdy cards in year 7 or something like that. So there's still a long time before that wave of market participants comes in. What do you think? Do you think he's going to be a hot commodity at the National?
I think your assessment's pretty spot on. I think you have to really factor in the young guys. With CJ Stroud, like there's so much room for growth in so many ways as a player. And I mean, what he showed this year is just so like tantalizing. And then you're right. You got to factor in the other young guys that are going to be really hot. And, people have that love of the unknown. I think you're spot on with where he's going to be. And then you have guys who have been hot at the National last few years who are going to have new life pumped into them. I mean, look at Herbert cards, right? With Jim Harbaugh there now, like that's a whole shot of life that his cards will have this offseason. So, I do agree with you. I think you nailed it. And you're right. I think you talked about yourself as a collector. I mean, you just really dove in big on your first big Mahomes card in year 7, right? I mean,
exactly.
So I respect the prove it to me. Purdy might have, and I think the lesson there is Purdy probably has a little bit longer of a way to go to really sell some people, but the market's for him is very healthy right now. And I think it's good to see no matter what happens Sunday.
Yep. And you know what? If he is what all of his advocates say that he is, then by year 5, year 6, year 7, he'll be crushing it. So those of us who don't mind waiting, I think we'll be all right.
Is he winning the Super Bowl Sunday?
Man, we opened this conversation talking about QBR, and I love QBR. I'm not saying it's predictive, but I do think it is good as an explanatory model. And here's what it's explaining to me about the playoffs this year. Purdy's QBR is 76 in the playoffs. Now, granted, that's weighed down by a performance in the rain against the Packers that really tanked his and Jordan Love's QBRs. So 76 is good. It's better than what he was in the regular season. He was about 73 in the regular season, which led the league. So he's playing really well in the playoffs. Patrick Mahomes' QBR through 3 games in the playoffs is 90.2. I saw an infographic on ESPN that said that's the highest QBR that any quarterback has held entering into the Super Bowl. So QBR is telling me Mahomes is cooking right now.
And you factor in that, just like you said with Purdy had a game in the rain. I mean, Mahomes played a game in a freezer.
He did. A few of them. Yeah. I mean, yes.
I can't wait to watch it. So this has been The Index, our first installment of 2024. Chris, thank you for bringing it to the table. The breakdown, the analysis, everything was great. Love the discussion. We're going to be back next month with another one. And hey, you know where to reach us on social at PSA Card on all platforms. If there's a trending card, trending athlete you want to hear broken down on The Index at the beginning of each month, shoot us a note. Let us know. We'd love to hear the feedback. So, Chris, thank you for the time today.
Thank you.
For Chris McGill, I'm Ryan Greene. Thank you for tuning into the PSA Pod. We'll talk to you again soon.